So I'm proud of the work that we have had a lot of people working on, administrators, teachers, collaborative, PHMTA. Everybody's done a great job with that, the leadership with Mr. Linsky, Dr. Short, and a host of other people really making a difference. Our highest priority at Penn-Harris-Madison School Corporation is safety. And you're going to be, I think, very, very happy with the kinds of things that are being shared. So the protocols are for the 2021 year, and we're going to kick this off with Mr. Linsky.
Thank you, Dr. Thacker. Good evening, President Riley, members of the board. Always great to see you. This evening, my colleagues and I are excited to share some of the information in regards to safety protocols that PHM is putting into place for the 2021 school year. This will certainly not capture all of the safety protocols we're put into place. Dr. Thacker mentioned this is a very fluid situation. We continue to get guidance from the state. We continue to get updated guidance from the local health department. And so this plan will also be fluid in our application and our modifications that will take place in the weeks to come. Almost exactly 30 days until school starts. So as we navigate this pandemic, we're really talking about three different environments. We have a safe environment, one in which we're collaborating again with all of those groups to create the plan we're putting together. And I will reiterate what Dr. Thacker said. We really appreciate our employee groups, the PHMTA, and all that have worked collaboratively to make this happen. We also appreciate the feedback from parents, those that have already submitted that data to us, those that are still working through that, and some of the questions that they've asked of us. And we're doing our best to answer those in a fact sheet. And I know that a lot of information will come out this week, and we hope that parents find it useful as they navigate this path. The second environment is that learning environment. And whether a parent chooses that virtually or they choose it in person, we want to make sure that it's an environment that PHM can be proud of. It's an environment that enriches the students' learning, it remediates, and for all students, and assists them in their development of the state standards. And so we appreciate the learning department's advocacy in making sure that both learning environments, whether it be virtual or in person, are equitable. And so they've done a good job of that, and they'll continue to work on that. And the third environment is a POS environment. We put a lot of emphasis on SEL, both as a staff and in the community, and we want to make sure that we continue that strategically into the 2021 school year. Tonight's presentation is obviously focused on the in-person, what's going to take place in the building. Some of these items have been presented to parents and to you in an overview, but we want to make sure we go through these again. I already indicated that we're collaborating with both the state and the county. All students and employees will be expected to self-screen before they leave home in the morning. Those guidelines, there's 11 of them, symptoms that parents will need to look for and staff members need to look for. And we ask that those who have symptoms don't attend school. All right, we want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on the risk, and we're mitigating as much as possible. I appreciate that. Staff and students are also required to wear a mask. And Dr. Mark Fox with the St. Joe County Health Department has recently indicated that it should be universal masking, all right, whenever possible. There are going to be situations such as eating in the cafeteria where it's impossible to eat with your mask on. But other than that, they expect us to have universal masking in the classroom, in the hallways, and on the buses. To accompany that, they ask us to practice social distancing to the best of our ability. And we're going to try to create an environment that allows for that. We're going to ensure that students and staff have access to hand washing, the use of hand sanitizer, and the enforcement of proper hygiene practices. All right, we know that kids need to be taught these things. We know that first day of school, there's going to be a lot of procedures just talking about health and safety. That is our #1 priority. So we're going to be spending a lot of time to start the year with the kids, and especially for those littles. We know that they'll be teaching, and there's going to be reteaching and reinforcement, and we'll certainly do so. Students and employees will receive training on that, and some of that's been rolled out. And then we're also going to discontinue any perfect attendance incentives. We don't want people to come to work sick. We don't want students to come to school sick. And so we'll make sure that those are discontinued for this school year. To help mitigate the risk, we will be providing our staff and our students the appropriate PPE. We're going to provide 2 reusable masks that will be used in the classroom and on the buses. They'll be handed out the first day. We'll break away lanyards because we realize there are going to be times, whether you're in recess or times that when you're eating, that you don't want to set it down. And so a lot of school corporations are providing that for families so that they can put that on, because we know not everyone can fit it in their pocket or want to do that. We'll have disposable masks available for those that forget a mask or have a problem with their mask. We'll make those available. Face shield will be available for any employee. And if any parent who feels that they would like their child to wear a face shield, they're welcome to send that to school with them in addition to wearing the mask. All right, so Mark Fox has been pretty adamant that you need to wear a mask regardless of the shield. And so that's how we're going to be starting the year. Disposable gloves will also be provided in the classroom, and that'll be for cleaning purposes. We know that the cleaning and disinfectant process is going to take place often, and so we're going to make sure that's available should any staff member or student want to use that because of an irritant that might happen. Some other items that we're going to provide schools, we're going to have infrared thermometers for the nurses' offices so that they can check those temperatures. We're going to have hand sanitizer everywhere that we can, so where we're allowed. So it'll be at the front entry doors, it will be in the hallways, it'll be available in classrooms. We're looking at some exterior locations so that it's available for recess. We'll have it available at our venues, so when people come and observe our athletic teams or fine arts, they'll also have access to that as much as possible. And I say as much as possible because it's in high demand. So I'm sure we'll start the year with it is everywhere that we can, and some of those items that are installed on the wall, we'll install those as we can acquire them. Disinfectant, I'm sorry, I skipped over our floor graphics. We are providing floor graphics to every school, and the principals are going to put those in strategic locations to help encourage students and staff members to practice social distancing. And those would be your high traffic areas. Disinfectant spray bottles we provided in the classroom for staff members because we know that whether it's a high touch surface like a doorknob or something else that they're using, we know that students are going to want to wipe down their Chromebooks, other pieces of technology or other things that they're using throughout the day. And we want to make sure that that's available for them to do so. We've got some supplemental alternative seating. In fact, it just came in this week for our elementary schools. And so that will be provided so that those elementary classrooms can make some modifications to provide social distancing space in the classroom at that elementary level. We also have temporary plexiglass barriers that are going to be strategically placed throughout the building where the public interact with the school office staff. Some of the things about our environment, we know that, the St. Joe County Health Department's certainly told us that, that COVID is out there. And so should COVID be brought up and a student or staff member indicates that they have COVID, this is our response plan. Students and staff that are exhibiting symptoms at home, we ask you not to come. If they have a staff member at home that's confirmed positive, they are to remain at home and seek that appropriate medical attention. Those who test positive for quarantine will quarantine for at least 10 days, and that will be by the guidance of their physicians, and remain fever-free for 72 hours prior to being accepted back to school. And that's without that fever reducer medication. Each school is going to identify an area within the building that if we have someone that's symptomatic, that they would be isolated to until they can either go home or a parent picks them up. Contact tracing will be conducted by the Department of Health. We will work with them and certainly work with our school community to make sure that we're notifying those who might have been exposed in full disclosure. And we did so in the spring if there were any concerns, and we'll continue to do so in the fall. Any school closure considerations, we'll be working in tandem with the St. Joe County Health Department on that. And so they've got a list of protocols that they're following. We've had some communication, and they will guide us as we make any kind of decision should a COVID positive case occur in our schools. And if a student has experienced any COVID symptoms, we've really got to count on our parents. We need those students to be picked up. We ask that parents make sure that their emergency contacts are updated because that student will need to go home as quickly as possible. We realize things come up, but we ask that it happens within an hour.
Mr. Linsky?
Yes,
Can I
sir.
ask you a question, sir?
Absolutely.
As it relates to school closure considerations, I think it's great that we're working in consultation with our local officials. Are there state considerations that go into account there? Did the state enact any legislation regarding school closures if there's a positive test among a student, staff member, or something like that?
Yeah, I have not seen at the state level. What the St. Joe County has indicated that it will all depend on the situation in which occurs. It will depend on what the school corporation has done to mitigate the risks and what procedures they have in place during the school day. So if someone was in close contact, and if multiple people were in close contact and they weren't wearing masks or we weren't able to socially distance, those determinations will likely result in some kind of closure of either an area or up to the entire school. That's a good question.
My impression was the state had some incantation of a law there, considering that if a school had a student or staff member test positive, there would be a kind of a mandatory closing for a period of at least 2 days and not exceeding.
Yeah, so
Did that go by the wayside?
yeah, I had not seen that come through at the state level. They have indicated to us that should they close the building down, it will be 2 to 5 days is what they're at this time what they're recommending. But as Dr. Thacker indicated, the situation is certainly fluid.
Okay, but that's not necessarily mandatory. It's made in consultation with our local health officials, correct, Mr.
That
Linsky?
is correct.
Thank you, sir.
That's my understanding at this time. You know, Dr. Thacker often talks about that triangle of success. You know, the parents, the teachers, and the students. When we talk about that safe environment, we talk about guests and visitors, we depend on everybody. And as much as we appreciate that parent volunteerism that takes place in our school that makes this place so great, we realize in the midst of this pandemic that we have to make certain modifications to our policies and procedures to ensure the health and safety of not only our school building, but also our students and our staff. So at this time, we're looking at restricting volunteers and visitors for at least the first 9 weeks of school. And that includes those lunch visitors and classroom volunteers. And that's in an effort to make sure that we're able to socially distance and keep less bodies in the room. We're also going to allow certain visitors, and I've listed those up there. School resource officers, of course, health and safety remains a top priority. Each of these individuals will also be expected to meet all of our health and safety protocols. So resource officers, vendors, and contractors, we're going to try to keep them on the outside of the building unless we have an emergency service that needs to be conducted on the inside. We have contracted healthcare providers and services that work with our students. We want to make sure they still have access to those. Student teachers, certainly work within our community, and with a teacher shortage nationwide, we want to make sure that we're promoting the best profession in the world, and we all know that in this room. And then we do have some community partners that act as educational support services, and anybody that's entering our building will be under principal review and principal approval. So the principal certainly has the authority to ask someone not to come in the building for whatever reason that they have. And then we ask that if when parents pick up their children, whether it be for an appointment or they're ill, that interaction will take place in a vestibule or out in the parking lot, depending on the situation. And we'll make sure that we communicate those protocols to families as they come up.
Mr. Linsky, in terms of classroom volunteers, I've gathered that classroom volunteers are more frequent with elementary classes. Is that correct?
That is true.
Kindergarten, first grade, the students who in particular would probably need the most hands-on help with hygiene. And I would further assume that the classroom volunteers would assist the teacher in implementing the protocols that we have for hygiene under the Return to Learn plan, right?
Sure.
In the absence of classroom volunteers, how are we to measure or predict our effectiveness in being able to carry out the return to school protocols for the students who need that more hands-on assistance from classroom volunteers?
Sure. You're absolutely right. Our youngest population, our littles, as we like to call them, require the most attention, as we all know at home when we've had young children. And so our staff and our principals work together to collaborate to make sure that there's adequate staffing at those levels, make sure that we have enough people to assist them. We know at the beginning of the year, when we're implementing those procedures, we certainly need more help at the kindergarten level than we do at the 5th grade level when assisting with those. And there'll be strategic times that the class is assigned to wash their hands or use hand sanitizer or whatever it may be. And I'm confident that our principals will have a plan in place to have staff members accessible so that we have adequate attention. And if we don't, for some reason, they'll certainly be communicating with us, and all of these policies and procedures are certainly, that's that gray area where we want to do what's best for kids. We want to manage a balance between mitigating the risk and then offering our kids what they need. And we'll certainly do that to the best of our ability.
Thanks, sir.
You're welcome. Obviously, cleaning and disinfecting is on everybody's minds, whether you're at home, whether you're going to a business, or whether you're coming to school. And so we know that we've already initiated updated custodial cleaning protocols, monitoring that's all in line with the CDC to provide that healthy and safe school environment. We were fortunate that we had time in the spring to implement a lot of these things and work with our custodial staff to get some of these things in place in anticipation for the return of students in the spring. That didn't happen, but we know that we'll continue to work this fall to make sure things are ready for kids to return. We're very fortunate that we have a national partner in Sodexo Management. They're certainly viewed as a leader. They have access to the most updated guidelines, practices nationwide. They're handling not only food, but they handle big business, they handle schools. And so we appreciate having that kind of a partnership in this situation. We also appreciate their access to supply chain. So, we know that PPE has been hard to come by, and they've been a great partner in acquiring the items that we need, whether it be in the spring when this first took place, or even preparing for school. Students and staff will have to be active participants. It's everybody's responsibility to keep the buildings healthy and safe. So not only watching out for yourself in symptoms, but also assisting with making sure you're cleaning your own desk area, whether you're cleaning your Chromebook, or just doing your part not to touch things you shouldn't touch. We know that we'll spend a lot of time with our students enforcing those and reinforcing those practices. There's a difference between cleaning and disinfecting, all right? My wife might say that I do a good job of cleaning and I don't do a very good job at disinfecting. She spends probably a lot more time than I do and is more careful. And in the building, cleaning, we take, the approach is you clean an area first and then you come back through and you disinfect it. That will be happening during the school day, that will be happening in the evenings, and we'll be disinfecting all hard surfaces to make sure we're killing as many germs and viruses that may or may not be present. Yes,
are you going to have to add staff to accomplish that?
It's like, Mr. Beeler, you're setting me up. Next bullet says PHM is in the process of hiring additional custodians. So we're working with Sodexo. We're hiring additional custodians to assist us because we know that we're going to need more hands on deck during the school day when people are present. Regardless of what we ask students and staff to help us with, we're going to need additional people. Great question. Drinking fountains are going to be used for bottle fill or cup refill only. They're not going to be used to drink from directly. We also are installing several bottle fill stations. The goal is to have several of those in every building. And that's a process we're in line with every school in the nation that's trying to get those installed. So that'll be a process that will continue throughout the year. But we're dedicated to at least getting started with a few, and we'll add as we can. This because we brought this forward before. We're adding hand washing station at several schools. We identified the schools that we could get done this summer, and so those projects are going very well, and we'll be hopefully approving the last ones tonight at Penn High School, and that will help to promote the health and safety of the building. Next slide, please. Thank you. Indoor air quality is certainly on the top of our list in terms of priorities. This is something we monitor all of the time, and we know that in light of the current pandemic and circumstance out there, we know that there'll be certainly a watchful eye and concern on this. And so we partner with Performance Services, who is our architect for our HVAC systems. Our systems are certainly designed to give maximum fresh air since the start of this pandemic. And so even this room right now, this building is set to max fresh air so we can have the greatest turnover possible and through that filtration system. Our plan is, under their advice, is to run the buildings 2 hours prior to occupancy and 2 hours after occupancy to make sure that we prepare the building and we exhaust the building after use. All of our systems are being checked for proper fit of those filters and we're either having MERV 8 or MERV 13 filters installed. And that's somewhat dependent on the system that you have. If some of the systems don't be, if you have an air handler that can't handle a MERV 13, you might be doing more harm than good trying to install a filter that might be more effective than another. So, but we're confident that our systems will be ready to go to start the year. Protective barriers, I mentioned that we're having some of these installed at various areas, and I've listed those. And we're really trying to look at those areas where the public is in direct contact with those staff members at a desk. Furniture, we're making every effort to social distance. So some of the furniture in the classroom, the teachers are working with their principals, and it will be disappearing for a short time at almost all buildings. And so that will certainly take place, and people, students in particular, will notice that happen. Building use, we're going to restrict the building's use to outside groups for the first 9 weeks. And that's just so we can get a handle on the lay of the land on what this means for our buildings. We pride ourselves in being a community center. We want to partner with all those community groups and provide access. But right now, we've got to make sure that we're servicing priority number one, which is those students in that learning environment during the school day. We're going to restrict our buildings at night. We'd love to have our teachers who put a ton of time in have access to their classrooms at night because they're creating those dynamic lesson plans and those neat activities for the next day. But we also have to prepare the building prior to the start of school. So we'll be having some restriction in terms of what hours the buildings are available. The Penn High School Fitness Center and the Penn High School Pool have been closed, and those will remain closed for the first 9 weeks. And again, that's an abundance of caution to make sure that we're able to handle what we have on our plate as it is. Community education classes will not be held in person, and we're going to have some virtual options, and that information will soon be released. I know our community education department is working on that. We'll have lots of signage in schools, and we had that in the spring as this started to arise in March, but we'll have more of it. There'll be notifications in front of our buildings. There'll be notifications of bathrooms, hallways, and that's just in an effort to just remind everybody that we're all in this together. There are some rules we all have to follow, regardless of your position, whether you're a student or adult. We're all on the same team. We have to work together to combat this. Next slide, please. So for transportation, I know we've gotten lots of questions about this. Students and staff, both the bus driver and the students, will be required to wear a mask. And that's got to, again, we're going to continue to harp on it. It's got to cover the nose and it's got to cover the mouth on the bus. If a student doesn't have a mask when they get on the bus, we know that that's that first point of contact. We want the kids to have a positive day. We don't want them to come to school and feel down because they forgot something. We'll have a disposable mask available for them. If it becomes a problem, we're going to work with the family to see what we can do to partner with them so that it doesn't become something that the student has to worry about day in and day out. We want everyone to start the day in the best possible position. Students refusing to wear a mask will be following our progressive discipline plan that's outlined in the handbook. All right, and that includes maybe losing the privilege to ride the school bus, right? We're all in this together. We need everyone to partner together, and we'll work with the parents if that student is not cooperative to try to create a plan so that they understand that they're in this with us. Students are going to sit in assigned seats. We know that we'll load as you get on. You'll move to the back so that we're minimizing those interactions between everybody. Students will be asked to remain seated. We're going to try to, again, reinforce keeping kids forward. And this is going to have to be done with a lot of guidance, a lot of teaching, a lot of reinforcement, and likely a lot of reteaching. Siblings will be seated together when possible, because we know that, as parents, they've indicated they want less exposure to other kids. So we're going to try to sit, if you're seated in a seat with somebody else, you'll be sitting with a sibling. Food and drink will not be allowed to be consumed on the bus. We don't want them touching their hands and their mouth. We want them keeping those masks on. And students will be dismissed by seat so that we can help get that staggered start into the building to help promote social distancing. Extracurricular activities, and these are, yes, sir.
So I saw Wisconsin authorized bus barriers. So plexiglass that would keep drivers shielded within their own department. I just came to cover Transpo's meeting, and they've done the similar things for their drivers. They're making people get on the buses for that. Has there been any discussion about those types of safety mechanisms for our drivers?
Yeah, that question is a good one, and it's a question that's been asked a lot from both for students and for staff. And at this time, the Indiana DOT has not approved any kind of barrier. They also have not approved any hand sanitizer on that bus as they get on, because of a concern. You know, that is it can be a flammable liquid, and with the buses being outside and exposed to the elements, both sunlight and heat, there's a concern about the safety of the occupants. So that's not allowed either. But as I say that, it doesn't mean it can't change. This is certainly a fluid situation. In fact, we just got additional guidance from the not only the state association but the national association on Friday. And so I know that there's a lot of talk still taking place, and we'll continue to monitor
But
that.
we've done everything we can pursuant to DOT regulations that we can to physically make our drivers safe.
Absolutely. At this time, we have done so.
Thank you, sir.
No problem. So extracurricular activities are taking place. Students and staff are required to wear a mask that covers the nose and mouth when not engaging in a vigorous activity and when it's practical. We're not limiting a student's ability to wear the mask in competition. The IHSA has been very clear on that. If a student or family desires for their son or daughter to wear a mask, they can do so in competition. Athletic teams are following the guidance of the IHSA. The IHSA has been a partner with the Department of Education. They've done a very nice job, and they were actually one of the first to have a real comprehensive plan that came out to share with families. Student participation, I just want to remind everybody, it's voluntary. Coaches have increased the flexibility to families when they have concerns about the health and safety or health and welfare of their child. And so we do have to follow the IHSA's guidelines in terms of attendance and what that requires, but our coaches are not kicking kids off or doing it. If a kid or a family feels it's unsafe for a kid to show up, then we're providing that latitude that comes with that. Yes?
Does that mean they'll be removing the 10 practice requirements before?
That is not. As I said, the IHSA has not removed that. So what they're saying is even though you'll be able to exercise a right as a parent to keep them out, but you still have to follow guidelines when you return at this time. So, again,
Today.
yeah, we'll see how that holds up.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We're asking all participants to furnish their own water bottles, and that's for practice and for competition, so that we can guarantee that they're only using their bottle. We're strictly not allowing anyone to share a bottle for the obvious reasons. We're trying to give them access to as much hand washing. If a participant wants to leave a practice to wash their hands, we're going to let them leave the practice. We have hand sanitizer at all practices, all facilities, all entrance points, and that includes at practices. Even if you're off-site, if you're at Elmwood Elementary and you're practicing, the coach is expected to have hand sanitizer available for you at that practice. We're also trying to reinforce proper hygiene practices. Take your equipment home, wash it. Don't wear. It used to be a source of pride to wear those lucky socks, Mr. Riley. I know you had them, but you can't wear those lucky socks. You gotta wash them. So, that's not a tradition. We don't have anything like that. So, if any of your children are telling you that that's a tradition, it's not. Take it home and wash it, or it will be thrown away. Our coaches are also making sure they're taking a lot of care of the equipment and disinfecting those balls and other things, pads, other things that you're touching throughout a practice in any particular sport. And the last thing is they gave us flexibility in virtual students. Those parents who choose the virtual option, they're still eligible to participate in all extracurricular activities. That wraps up my session. I'll certainly be around to answer questions for you additional. At this time, we're really going to move on. I was covering the general basics of what it looks like outside of the school, within the school to a degree when you talk about operations and facilities. At this time, we're going to have three principals talk to you about what it looks like at every level. And we're going to cover four areas: arrival, lunch and recess, what it looks like in a transition, and then what it looks like at dismissal. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Ryan Towner, principal at Walt Disney Elementary.
Thank you, Mr. Linsky. Dr. Thacker, President Riley, and Board Trustees, it's a pleasure to be with you this evening to share particulars of our elementary return to learn plan, the safety elements The elementary principals who collectively work together. These slides represent common elements, if you will, across our buildings. I'll be able to add some particulars to Walt Disney to provide some context and maybe share a little bit about what some other schools are doing. Collectively as a group, we thank our PHMTA building reps and the teacher teams who met with each principal to review plans, share ideas, and provide input. It's been just tremendously beneficial. All right, talking about arrival. So if you can imagine when the buses pulled up in the prior days, it would be where you have 8 buses pull up, the students pile out, they're excited for the day, and they fly into the doors and you have a massive bottleneck, right? That's what we want to prevent. And so our plan is to have buses unload one at a time with supervision, right? Not having the kids run in together, try and have that social distancing element present. We want students, I mentioned flying into one door, we really want students to utilize as many of the entrances as possible. Folks, I'm sorry, my glasses are fogging up to the extent I think I'll be able to read it. I hope it's all right. I was talking to Mr. Lenski, I think Bowling Laser Center is going to get a call from me soon. So our intent is to have the buses dismiss one at a time with supervision to have social distancing occur, and to have students then move around the exterior to the exterior door nearest their classroom to prevent that congestion in the hallways. Our car riders, we anticipate many car riders, and so upon arrival, and this is in large part the continuation of processes we have used in all our buildings. But students will exit their vehicle as directed by supervising staff. We will ask that parents remain in their vehicles. It can be hard those first days, right? Everyone wants to walk their child to the door. We're trying to eliminate as many bodies moving that way as possible. Again, we'll ask that students, rather than coming in one primary entrance for car riders, that they utilize the exterior doors of the building to go to the one that is nearest their classroom. We plan to extend our drop-off period, meaning we will start getting students out of vehicles a bit earlier. As you can imagine, we have parents who start lining up pretty early. And so that by doing that sooner, we want to accommodate all of our parents who bring students in cars. We would hate for someone who's been in line since 7:40 to not get to drop their student off till 8:10. So we're going to really staff that especially well the first few weeks to see what we have and then modify from there. Upon arrival of the classroom, students should wash their hands or use hand sanitizer. Mr. Lenski shared we'll have that readily available. We mentioned that all materials should be present at school. We want to eliminate the use of backpacks. In class, the document from the DOE mentioned eliminating or significantly reducing the back and forth items to and from home. And so we feel that that is an effort that really helps bring that about. That was something that when I met with my teacher group was broadly supported. They felt very good about that. We feel that helps avoid congestion in the courtroom areas as well. We'll have designated areas in classrooms for lunch boxes. I think knowing that many students will be bringing their lunches and we want to create a process for that. As we think about the transitions, restroom breaks, boy, it becomes important in an elementary school. And we have just broad faith in our teachers to help develop a plan or a schedule for those students. In my building, we have about 8 classrooms who utilize a restroom, the pod has that restroom there. And so those teachers, we've already spoken, they know that they'll come together in the days before school starts to develop a schedule that will allow for social distancing. We would, of course, will be teaching, reteaching, emphasizing. It's a common thing of what we do in elementary, just reviewing procedures consistently. If this class is lining up to go to gym, well, before we leave the room, we're going to review a few safety measures that we need to practice in the hallways, right? Consistently redirecting and reteaching. So students will be supervising in those pod areas during restroom breaks, and students will be expected to follow directions for entering and exiting. The size of the restroom, staff availability, there are variables that come into play. When I met with my team of teachers, they shared the idea of, well, could I just remain in the room with my class and maybe 2 go at a time? And that's something that if, through aid supervision, we can accommodate. We do like that better than having, 25 students kind of 6 feet apart winding around the pod area. And so there's a lot of ideas for us to arrive at decisions with once we have more information from parent surveys and just have conversation with those teachers again on what they feel best about. The hallways, we want students to stay to the right while in the hallways. Mr. Lenski mentioned signage. We want very much almost like traffic down the street in those common movement areas. Something that we're going to be teaching our students is when two people meet at a doorway, that the person exiting has the right of way. We also will have students spaced apart, 6 feet apart. The running joke has always been with a kindergarten classroom, when you leave the room, the line's about 20 feet long. By the time you reach your destination, it's about 380 feet, right? Maybe you lost 2 on the way, you have to go find. Well, that's kind of what we want now, right? We want to teach them to distance well when in lines. Something that the teachers at my school gave a lot of feedback about was directional flow. That becomes very important. In our pod areas, square shaped, we're going to be emphasizing to turn right. So when you come out a door, there's any room, there's a set flow, and then we go about to our destination. Thank you, Steve. For our instructional areas, classrooms, to create more space in the classrooms, we're removing excess furniture. Many of our buildings have tables, which have been great, but if you have 4 students seated at those tables, it doesn't really maximize the space in the classroom well. Sanitizer, again, will be available at entry doors in each classroom. We seek to have students spaced apart as much as possible. And so sometimes students need a little assistance with what that looks like, especially our younger students. They don't always maintain distance very well. Something that we've used for several years now are sit spots. If you can imagine, it's a spot, a circle on the ground, oftentimes numbered, and students know that's my spot. So we want to, that signage becomes important to help students understand social distancing. Mr. Lenski shared about the portable or the flexible seating that's going to assist in maintaining social distancing. We're excited about that. You know, the idea of if we have students working more on the floor, like sit on this spot, you need a writing surface. You need something to place a book on, and so that's very helpful. It's common, it's been common throughout our day that we use so many learning materials, manipulatives. I think about our reading specialist, and they have these wonderful magnetic boards with the letters and different letter sounds and blends and so on. Well, now we need to make sure that we sanitize. So we're looking at, in my building, we're looking at purchasing a few more sets, and then we can kind of rotate sets in and out while we're sanitizing. Math manipulative, same thing. Anything students are touching and working with, it adds a lot of value instructionally, but we've got to make sure we're safe. And so that's something that we would be disinfecting any time between uses. For PE and music classes, we're going to be pretty creative with our scheduling there, looking into using additional spaces. There may be times where we need to even allocate some aid resources just to help create smaller groups, smaller clusters from what's been typical with our scheduling. So that is something that is in development, that is at the forefront of all principals' minds. Lunch. So lunch is, I guess I'll share these comments and then some additional ones. Hand sanitizing, hand washing, our expectation is that occur both pre and post lunch. Our schedules will be built in a way to allow for that. The cafeteria and gymnasium may both be used as lunch spaces. It's scheduled by the principal, taking into account space considerations and student numbers. Of course, enrollments vary by building, and our blueprints, right? The space in the cafeterias do as well. We have had one building that has 2 grade level, or they have 2 lunch periods of 3 grades in each. We have some buildings that have 3 lunch periods with 2 grade levels apiece. Several of us have had 6 lunch periods. And so as we consider social distancing at lunch, it's just critical, right? Because we know students aren't wearing masks. And so in many of the buildings, you're going to see the gym used for lunch. That will be the case at Walt Disney. And in doing so, we will maintain our 6 lunch schedule. We know that we can very safely social distance in that setting. We can have all students seated at tables. And we believe we'll find great success with that. Some of the schools will be using both spaces. In my building, the cafeteria now becomes almost like a pseudo space where gym class can occur, if not outside. So there are some considerations there, but lunch is something we're giving a special consideration to. Lunches will be pre-packaged if purchased at the school, and it's always been our practice. We will continue to disinfect all of the table surfaces and then chairs as well between student groups in the cafeteria/gym. When we give consideration to recess, that has been a space where we think about what recess has always been, and it seems that illness can travel easily in that format. And so that's what we want to be careful of. So our idea in talking as a principal group and getting feedback from teachers is to have students clustered. So if we imagine a grade level, to have that grade level then clustered, very likely in their classroom bubble, right? And then the idea to break our playground down into different sections or areas or zones, and to have students assigned to a set zone for that day. And then, throughout the week, they will rotate through the different zones. We just want to minimize, heaven forbid, you have a positive case. We want to be able to know who was in what space as that student and who was not in that space. Ball cart equipment won't be available the first 9 weeks. We will reevaluate, of course, at that point or slightly before. Students will be instructed to follow social distancing at recess. A creative idea that came from one of our teachers and found wide acceptance among the principal group is to have some PE instruction at the start of the year, focus on recess games that accomplish social distancing. The idea is you take away the ball cart and you tell these kids, you play in this field. And then they all look at you and say, what are we supposed to do, right? And so we hope to have our PE teachers then teach students games. I'm thinking of things like relay races where you're not having to pass any baton or anything. Just different types of games that will help students get their energy out, have a great time at recess, and still be social distancing and observing safe measures. Broadly speaking, we want to dismiss in a manner. We have to dismiss in a manner that allows for social distancing. That's our goal. And so, at what has been the practice at our schools is it's always been a focus on keeping track of every student. We've always, at all our schools, dismissed Kids Club students just a little bit earlier so that Kids Club has time to take attendance before the buses leave. We never want a student to leave on a bus that their parents expecting they were going to go to Kids Club. Then we end up with a student who comes home to an empty house, right? So those are things that are always on our minds. And now we have some additional considerations. So we will still dismiss Kids Club early and probably quite early, like around 2 o'clock, probably the first week or two of school, to give time for everything to go well, to feel things out, how long they take. Kids Club will report to the gymnasium. In my case, we want to make sure Kids Club is reporting to an area where there's not a lot of congestion. Bus riders will then be dismissed. We plan to call individual buses at a time. So instead of a teacher taking the whole rest of the class, car riders and bus riders, and we're making our way to the exits, and it's a very congested feel in the hallways, we're going to be calling individual buses. And then for car riders, now there is some variance by building, but will be dependent on the number of car riders and of course the need to promote social distancing. Many of our schools have had practices for car riders that already meet these requirements in terms of social distancing. An idea that has been shared, it's been common that parents have a number, they post that in their window, and then the student has a number assigned, they have a card, their number is called, the student exits the building, hands their number to the adult who's there, and gets into their car. And many of the schools have had students report to the cafeteria or a common space. And so what we're considering is to have students not report to a common space, but rather to remain in the rooms. We will have then teachers or aides present to help with supervision. And then the idea being to have an electronic way. So if you have a spreadsheet with a number grid and a person out of the car line is just entering on their phone, they're entering the numbers. And those are coming into and displaying on the projectors in each room. The student's able to see when their number's called, they dismiss. And so in doing that kind of method, we end up pulling students from different areas of the building at different times, and it really reduces congestion. And so those are our elementary considerations. Certainly, I'm very happy to answer any questions that you have before I pass on to my colleague.
Mr. Towner,
Yes.
at the elementary school level, and perhaps Mr. Linsky at the more general level, a question that I commonly receive from parents involves PE.
Sure.
And whether students are going to be required to wear masks during PE, and what, if any, health risks that would incur if in fact they are required to wear masks.
I'll let Mr. Linsky, is there
so-
any added? I don't know if athletics elements carry into that or not.
Yeah, so, we hope to start the school year with most of our physical education classes taking place outside. And outside lends itself, under, Mark Fox has indicated, Dr. Fox has indicated that if you're outside in social distancing, we can certainly do so without the mask on. When we're in the building, I think we do have restrictions, and it will depend on the activity. If it's not too rigorous, I think we're gonna keep the mask on, and I would imagine, as Mr. Towner shared, there'll be some spacing challenges inside if we're gonna utilize the gymnasium for something else. It's really, we need to make sure we're talking, it's health and it's physical education and health. So there are gonna be times where it could be more, some shorter activities, ones that can be done, conducted safely in an area that's outside the gymnasium. It's more focused on the health or teaching of what's going on in your body at the same time.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to introduce my middle school colleague, Levon D. Milne.
Levon D. Milne, let me say a couple things about him.
Are you sure? Just jump right in.
Now, Levon D. Milne just finished, successfully completed, and defended her dissertation for university. So now it is Dr. Levon D. Milne.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Well, good evening, President Riley, members of the board, Dr. Thacker, and other guests and visitors tonight. I always enjoy presenting and sharing with you tonight. So I am glad to be the middle school representative. Just so you know, along with what Mr. Towner was saying, the middle school principals have worked very closely together. Mr. Milford, John Milford at Prism, and then Mrs. Elizabeth Cunha at Discovery. So we have had regular video chats and conversations about these things, and I've also had teams of teachers who have helped us give us feedback too. So I will do the same that Mr. Towner did. I will give you kind of the general overview for middle school, and then I'll just give you some specifics about what it looks like at Schmucker. So we kind of go from the general to the specifics. So I'll go through the same 4 categories as well. So the first one is middle school arrival. So again, we're trying to really decrease the congestion in areas with arrival where we have lots of kids coming at one time. Some of the biggest things that we're going to do to help with that is using multiple exterior doors. So we're going to utilize all of the doors and have kids come in kind of what's closest to their first period class. So for bus riders, students will disembark off the bus. Again, we'll do that staggered dismissal from the bus, disembarking. Car riders, also, we're going to do something very different at Schmucker. We have that curbside all the way from Fillmore to the back side of the building. We usually just use from door C to the back side. We're going to now utilize that whole area. So we're just kind of doubling that area for students to get out of their cars and then again go into the exterior door that's closest to their first class. And the same for walkers, that they'll have many more doors to come into and then go directly to their first class. So the next one we're going to talk about instructional areas. In middle school, probably our biggest change was our schedule. So as you know before, we had a 6-period day with 1 advisory class. So that was 7 classes. That was a lot of transition throughout the day. So we decided collectively that what would be best is to move to a somewhat block schedule or an every other day schedule. So students will still be scheduled for 6 periods, but they will do periods 1, 2, and 3 on one day, and then 4, 5, and 6 on the next day. So again, that was to really cut down on the transition time and the time in the hallways. So of course, like other areas, they'll use a hand sanitizer, will be available in each classroom, and they'll use that when they come in. Within the classroom, we're trying to sit them apart as much as possible. Like we said, give them some space in between. And we're making more room in the classrooms to get rid of some of that excess furniture. So a specific example of that, at Schmucker Middle School, for a long time, teachers had those L-shaped desks, right, those big ones. So we have just taken off one side of that desk and just moved to one desk. Flexible seating has become very popular in the last couple of years, and I know some of our teachers have a hard time parting with that. But some of those seats that they use as incentives that multiple students would use, we're removing those from the classrooms, or the flexible seating that have lots of fabric and things like that, we're moving. The next part, we talk about instructional areas, and Mr. Riley, you mentioned this too. I think a lot of our questions come from these kind of categories, so I'm going to try to give you some examples of what it looks like at Schmucker. So physical education, again, as Mr. Linsky said, we're going to hope to have a lot of those classes outside, but we do know that we live in Indiana, and you cannot count on that. So, for example, in Schmucker, we have obviously a large-size gym, if you've been there, so we already separate classes in there. But then we're also reserving the LGI, so our large group instruction space, to also then have a class meet there. So again, trying to provide some extra space for those students and taking into consideration the other pieces we talk about, like having masks on when they're getting instruction or before they're up and around, before that really intense physical activity between them. Then band is another class that we're working on and continuing to work. I actually met with Mr. Carnall, our band instructor, this morning to brainstorm some ideas and to discuss some things. We're very lucky at Schmucker. We have 2 band teachers. So some of those classes they co-teach. So in the past, what would happen is we would have like the 7th grade band. They would co-teach together, and they would maybe start everyone in the same class. Then one of the teachers might take a small group to the hallway or do a rotation. Instead of that, what we've set up for this next year is we will divide that class. So part of the class will stay with Mr. Carnall, then the other part of the class will go with Ms. Hills to another classroom within the building. So we're just utilizing some classrooms that we have not used in the past to separate those. Same for orchestra. It's a little different with orchestra because the students can wear their masks while they're playing. Choir is another one that we're looking to really spread some students out. So we are working in our master schedule to whenever possible, have some of our larger choir classes where it's more singing is the focus, to put that like in the cafeteria where they can spread out when it's non-cafeteria times. Or like for our 6th grade music class choir, a lot of that is based on music theory as much as singing. So those are just a couple examples kind of in those areas of what it looks like at Schmucker and what we've talked about with some of those teachers to really help our students social distance and keep everyone safe. The next one is middle school transitions. So first of all, lockers will not be utilized. We have that same conversation that, you know, we like our students. I mean, normally students have everything in their lockers except for a binder that they carry around with them. But we thought this year it was just wise to just not use lockers. That really avoids that whole contact area. And I know it may come as a shock, but middle schoolers do like to socialize at their lockers. So we're just going to avoid that part and have them take their backpacks with them throughout the day. Passing periods will be staggered and students will pass in groups. So, and specifically at Schmucker, we're going to pass like by grade levels. So like we'll dismiss 6th grade first. We're going to try a 3-minute passing period. That's shorter than what our normal passing period is, but the hallways will be emptier. They're not having to stop at lockers. They are literally just going to and from their class. We'll also look at hallway traffic flow. So we'll design that and mark that. So a good example of that is like if 6th graders are going to lunch, we have most of our 6th grade hallways in that, or 6th grade students in that far hallway. So we'll have some classes that will be assigned to take the 8th grade hallway on that way to the cafeteria. Some other ones will take the hallway by the office to get to the cafeteria. So just going through those procedures. And then of course, just like Mr. Tavis said in elementary, it's teaching those procedures and setting those expectations for all of these pieces, which we've talked about presenting through WSMS, our morning news, as well as just teachers continuously teaching those activities to them. So again, we talked about not congregating in the hallways with limited passing periods and not going to lockers. I think will help with that immensely. Then we also have restroom breaks. So we're going to schedule those. What we've talked about is having certain classes will be assigned to a certain restroom. And then the teachers of those classrooms will get together to create a schedule. So essentially it will be during first period, because we will have longer blocks, which will be helpful. During first period, you know, these 3 teachers, you have this window of time to use the restroom, and then the next group has a window of time. So of course, if there's emergencies, students can use the restroom, but trying to limit that when students are coming and going, I think will help too. And then of course, just limiting the passes outside the classroom. And a lot of those things we already have in place, like students can request to meet a counselor. They can do that as an online request, so they don't have to walk down to the office to meet them. We have a lot of those technology pieces that have already been in place to help with that. And then middle school lunch. So of course, students will be directed to wash and sanitize their hands. Some of the schools have new hand washing stations. Schmucker has one of those being put in today. I actually talked to the gentleman who was painting it today, so we're getting close. That's great. So they will be encouraged to wash their hands and of course using the restrooms by the cafeteria there as well. We will have individually packed lunches, easier to minimize kind of their time in line. Lunch will be provided in socially distanced spaces with appropriate protective equipment. So what we've done is I've been working with Jill Riggs, and at Schmucker, the students will get their ID cards and we'll have a barcode. So in past times when middle school students, they would get their lunch and then they type in their student ID to pay for their lunch. So we won't do that anymore. It will just be use scanners. So there'll be those plexiglass dividers between the food service and the students, and they can just scan the card instead of using that common keypad. So just trying to do a lot of pieces like that to help give us some extra safety measures within. So students in the cafeteria, all 3 middle schools are offering additional space. So again, that really speaks to what the layout of your building is. And Schmucker, we're going to be utilizing the commons area, the stage, and if needed, we can use part of the gym, but I think we will be able to fit all of our students within the commons area and the stage. We have also moved to offering 4 lunch periods at Schmucker. In the past, we've only offered 3, and we're going to add an additional lunch period in our schedule. So I think that will help immensely as well. Students, of course, will have assigned seats. At Schmucker, they will sit in the same group that they're coming from that class. So like you will have lunch on a second period. On Wednesday, you will have your assigned seat within the students in the second period. So again, kind of keep those pods of students together. And of course, after lunch areas will be sanitized after each grade leaves lunchroom. So that takes us to the last one here is student dismissal. So again, we will stagger dismissal. That will stay consistent with the passing periods. So we will dismiss by grade level in 3-minute increments. And again, that will reduce the number of people in the hallways. Multiple doorways will be used, really encouraging kids to social distance as they leave, using multiple exits and also exiting to the door closest to their classroom. Again, the consistency with masks and really teaching students to do that, to wear those on their way out. And car rider procedures, again, will alter that. At Schmucker looks like using all that curbside. We often have students kind of all congregate at the end of the building to have cars drive around to them. Instead, we're going to be utilizing all of that curb area for the car riders and pickup. So that takes me to the end of the middle school section. Is there anything you'd like me to elaborate on or give other specific details? I'd be glad to share with you what it looks like at Schmucker. All right, well, thank you again. It's always a joy to present to you and share with you. So good to see everyone tonight.
Thank you. It's great to see you too.
Great job, Dr.
Welcome,
Welcome, Mr. Gallagher.
Well, good evening, President Riley, Dr. Thacker, members of the Board of Trustees and guests. Good to see a few high school guests in attendance tonight. I was reminded by Mr. Hapke that I'm hitting cleanup tonight, and I appreciate the baseball reference and the anticipation of MLB opening up this Thursday. So that's exciting. So I'll do my best to hit cleanup tonight, but I'm going to go over a few things at the high school level. I think you're going to see a lot of similarities with respect to what you've heard today from my colleagues. So I don't want to go over every single bullet point because you're going to see a lot of consistencies. However, specifically at the high school level, you'll see we start at 8:05, and we expect our teachers to be in their classroom if they're teaching a class at that time, or if they do not, they will be helping supervise somewhere in our building. So to start our day, we will have the students coming in wearing a mask and teachers supervising throughout our building to ensure we're encouraging students to maintain social distancing throughout our building. You'll see there that we open our building at 7:30, and we have to have a space for students coming early. And what we have in place is we have a designated location in the IMC. If students do arrive early and for some reason are not going to be supervised, we will provide that supervision for them. But typically teachers are supervising those students for early morning clubs or meetings that they've arranged. We'll have hand sanitizers at all the doors. We're going to obviously encourage students not to congregate in the hallways. Breakfast will be interesting. Students will have a couple locations. Right now it's in one spot in our IMC, but we're going to have at least 2. And depending on how many students are interested in breakfast, we will expand that so we can separate and spread those locations out. And we're going to add 2 more doors to the arrival entry point. So we typically have 4 doors that we have students come in. We're going to add 2 more so we can spread out the number of students and throughout our building. So just elaborating on car riders and buses very specifically for Penn, you'll notice we will have additional doors as well. I think we're going from 4 to 7 different doors that car riders can enter. Again, we're encouraging students to report directly to first block when they arrive to class. And buses, as mentioned before, we'll be expecting students to wear masks at all times and socially distance as they exit the bus. If you can imagine the start of the school day at Penn, we have 70 buses maybe on a given day showing up. So we're going to have additional doors, and the hope is to, as bus drivers arrive, they're going to make sure they go to a door that's not occupied at that particular time. I don't think we'll dismiss one bus at a time, but we'll make sure we spread the buses out because we'll have multiple entrances for the students. And again, students will report directly to their first block class as they exit the bus.
Mr. Gallagher, I see that we're going to have 7 doors that can be dropped up. How many more is that than we were operating under last school?
For buses?
Yep.
We had 5.
Okay, so it's only a couple.
Just a couple, yeah.
Will buses be assigned a door, or will they just pick out a door that's not being used?
So all of our buses come through, the majority of our buses, we come through on the bittersweet side of the building. So they will kind of look and see who's there, and they'll go to the nearest entrance where there's not a bus parked. And our entrances are pretty far apart, so we can spread out students that way. We also have on the Jefferson side of the building, towards L&M, we have a couple buses. Usually it's exceptional education buses that will come on that side, and we'll keep those, they'll obviously be separated from the rest.
That's a good idea.
So considering instructional areas, we heard from Levon that they're going to go to a 3-period day. We're going to keep to our 4 blocks. We have a block 4 schedule, but we will adjust the length of blocks 1, 3, and 4 to accommodate a couple different things. Staggered arrival, students maybe taking longer to get to that first block class. And then at dismissal, we will have a staggered dismissal, so we're going to apply some time there. And then lunch supervision, I'll get into those details here in a little bit, but we want to provide some time to accommodate our students who are eating lunch due to the number of students we have at any one time, which is about 800 students eating lunch during each of our lunches. So I'll get into those details here shortly. So we will, again, within our classrooms, we'll have to move from, less collaboration in terms of desks, kind of, students working together to more straight rows, students facing forward, so we can make sure we keep the students socially distanced as much as we can. And when there is an opportunity to remove excess furniture, we will. So looking at the very specific classes that were spoken of here earlier, physical education, again, we're going to be outside as much as possible. We do have a lot of space. We have our fitness center. We have our main arena. We have our east and west balconies. We have lots of locations for students, but we will encourage our teachers to be outside when they can. Band, I've talked to our band directors and our orchestra and our choir folks, and we have a great plan in place to spread students out. So extra instruments for band will be moved to a different storage area. They will no longer use their practice rooms. Usually they have 1 or 2 students in those locations. And then orchestra, again, practice rooms will be closed. And then when we think about choir, we have our CPA, which is a large space, so we're going to take advantage of that space more regularly and have students kind of separated into 2 locations. We're fortunate, and with most of our fine arts courses where we have some co-teaching going on due to the numbers of students, so we're able to split them up into separate locations. So we're excited about that. And then transitions. So if you can imagine the bell rings at the end of the first block, you have all the students emptying into the hallway. So the expectation is going to be you have to wear a mask during transitions, and students will be reporting directly to their next block. We're going to encourage students to kind of exit right as they leave their classrooms to encourage kind of a natural traffic pattern for students, so we don't have students crossing. So we'll educate students at the start of the year. Again, we're going to supervise students in the hallway and make sure we're not congregating during passing periods. The passing periods will be a little shorter this year. We're going to go from 6 minutes to 5 minutes to accommodate, they don't have as much time to talk. So we'll be able to kind of shorten that up for them. We'll limit bathroom passes. And of course, I think it's been mentioned, we'll only have the water filling stations be usable during those times. And students will not be issued lockers, which is not much of an issue for us because students do not use lockers. I think we had about 50 kids out of 3,000 use lockers last year. So that's the idea. Now, when we think about lunch, this is where it gets really specific. So again, during transitions, they'll wear their masks to and from lunch, and we'll encourage them to visit the hand washing stations and use hand sanitizer. We do have a few additional hand washing stations being installed, which is great. But when you think about the cafeteria, and I think most of you have been in there during a lunch, we usually have about 750 kids in there, and you can't socially distance well with 750 students in that space. So we're going to limit the number of students in the cafeteria. We think we can get close to 350 students in there, which will put about 3 students per table, if you think of those 12-foot tables that we typically use. And then we're going to use auxiliary areas. We're going to use our IMC. And then we're going to have students eating in classrooms as well. And we'll be separating them into smaller groups of students to encourage social distancing, because obviously when they're eating, they have to take their masks off. So how do we accommodate all of those different areas? You'll see we're going to deliver meals to 5 locations throughout our building, and not just the cafeteria. We'll obviously use the cafeteria. We're going to have a station up by the IMC at the top of stairwell A. We'll also have door D, door L as locations as well, and then inside of our IMC. So we're going to assign classrooms. We'll have certain locations they get to go to for each lunch. And if you're in a classroom, you're only going to have maybe 2 or 3 classrooms coming to that area at any given time to get their lunch if they want to purchase a lunch. And we'll continue to have 4 lunches. And of course, we'll be cleaning our lunchroom and our areas where students pick up their food between each lunch. And finally, dismissal is maybe the easiest of all these for us, but we're going to encourage mask wearing as students leave, and we will dismiss students at the end of the day by bus number, class location, or type of transportation. So we will stagger dismissal, because we've added some time to 4th block to accommodate that. We won't just let all students leave at the same time. We're thinking we can do it in maybe 4 different dismissal blocks with about 30 seconds to 60 minutes apart, or 60 seconds apart. So we're going to have to try that out the first couple days, but the hope there is to keep students from congregating, so we'll have smaller numbers of students in the hallways during that time. So that concludes the dismissal portion. I think that kind of wraps it up for all of us. We're happy to answer any additional questions if there are any, or specific to the high school.